Hello, welcome to my channel Dharma Makes, and welcome to this upcycling project. I turned a beer can into a vase. So I had this pretty fancy can of beer. It's very different from the common cans. It's very thick and it has a unique shape. So instead of just putting it in the recycling, I decided to make a vase out of it. As you can see, I used a can opener to get rid of the top, but because the metal was so thick, it was actually quite hard to cut all the way through it, so I had to use a blade and scissors to get rid of it. But of course, I'm left with a very sharp edge, and to get rid of that, I really want to cushion it. So I'm using a paper straw that I'm going to cut a slit in and sort of dress up the edge. Basically using it like you would use a pool noodle over the wire. And it looks a little bit rough now, but this itself will be dressed up even further. I just needed to make sure that sharp edge is well concealed. And I'm going to be using hot glue to fix this paper straw to the lip of the beer can. Actually, there will be vast amounts of hot glue used on this project, as I'm working with metal, so PVA glue wouldn't have held that well. And definitely there would be a lot of sliding around which can make work really frustrating. Now, to further hide that ugly lip, I am going to be using a wide ribbon. This one has a little bit of a ribbed texture. I just took it off a Christmas present I recently got. With that problem solved, I am moving on to the fun stuff. I have this pair of earphones that are definitely broken, and I figured I could use the wire as a design element instead of just throwing them away. Didn't end up using every part of the earphones, but hey, I used the wire. A little bit less waste. So it had a divot right at the bottom that I really wasn't fond of. So I just put a few layers of this wire wrapped around it. And I'm going to put one just under the lip, and not just wrap it in a circle. I'm also going to work this into some curly cues as a design element. And at this point, everything looks horrible because there's hot glue spillage all over the place, and it's a work in progress. It's going to look terrible for a long time until it's unified by color. The next thing I want to do is I want to add texture to this surface. I don't want any of that plain metal just coming through. So I have some creepy cloth left over from Halloween, and this is sort of like a loosely woven fabric. And I'm just cutting bits out of it and gluing it on here and there, covering certain areas of the thing. As you can see, actually going around the curly cues. I don't want to obscure those lines. But this is kind of like already giving me something to play with. It's always a little bit daunting to just start working on a big flat surface. So I have pulled out a variety of different elements and bits and bobs. I am using a metal butterfly, some watch parts, lots of buttons, these gears and cogs, some beads, different kind of metal charms and elements that also have some of those tiny keys. And I'm just creating clusters and arrangements that seem to be aesthetic somehow to me. It's very hard to explain the thought process. I don't really have a clear plan in my mind when I'm doing something like this, but I do have a vision or like a theme. I'm also using these smaller flower-shaped beads to put in corners, and because there's lots of these, they sort of end up tying together all the different clusters. So at this point it looks really, really ugly. You know, everything is of a weird color and it just looks like a mess of things. But with the paint job and the base coat, we're going to start to get a view of where this is going. I know that aesthetics are a question of taste, but I really like this sort of disordered harmony. I do like symmetry and I do like precision in some things, but with round objects and imprecise shapes and 3D objects, it's sort of easier to just embrace the chaos and try to create something beautiful out of the mess. As usual, I'm using acrylic paint, and I'm using this chocolate brown as a base coat. Not much of it will be preserved by the end, but at least I have this nice dark undertone. If anywhere I would make a mistake with the future coats of paint, it would be just a neutral brown in the background. So the actual colors I want to use when the base coat has dried is primarily blue and green. I know that later on I will be adding an element to this that's going to be very green. So I'm mostly leaning towards blue. I want it to look primarily blue, but I love kind of like the mix and the in-between place of blue and green. So I'm just mixing the colors straight on the surface, as you can see, and I'm not even too bothered about getting my brush into all the nooks and crannies because I do have that brown base coat. As you can see, I've actually left two elements unpainted, and those are some watch faces that I didn't want to lose the details of. When that has dried, I am going in with a much brighter blue and green, and this time I'm dry brushing. So all the dark colors stay in the shadows and in the nooks and crannies, but I'm bringing out all the shapes and textures with the dry brushing and livening up the color of the whole piece. And I think this is the point where it's starting to look like what I'm going for. At this point, I'm quite happy with the paint job, so it's time to seal it all in. I also want to darken the shadows a little bit. So I'm mixing a little bit of brown acrylic paint into yellow shellac ink. and I'm going to do a very thorough wash across the entire surface. This makes it look aged, almost vintage in my opinion, and I really like this aesthetic. And also the shellac ink helps with permanently sealing in those layers of paint so that with time and usage, if it gets rubbed against, it won't be flaking. After that wash, I left it dry for quite a number of hours, and this is what we have at this point. I've lost some of the best highlights, so I'm just going back in with a little bit more blue. Not too much, just here and there, touching some of the brightest, highest points. And I even used an even lighter blue just with the tip of my finger. And because I have that beautiful copper colored watch face, I have decided to go with a copper colored metallic paint to just rub and buff over the top of all of these dimensional elements, to bring all the colors together and create sort of like a unity across the whole thing. And I just happen to really like things rubbed with metallic paint. At this point, the paint job is done. But here's my favorite part. I am going to be adding lots and lots of artificial moss to all of the areas on the surface that don't have the creepy cloth texture and don't have any dimensional elements. So anywhere that would have been just the normal Beercan surface with a few layers of paint. And I'm doing this by adding undiluted PVA glue and sprinkling on the mixture of artificial moss. It's a mixture because it has bigger particles and chunks in it and very fine ones as well. And I've mixed this myself from different packages because I like having that variation. I think it looks better, it looks more organic. And you know, I don't need to do 2 coats of it this way. So as you can see, I'm just picking out spots and sprinkling it on, and sometimes using my fingers to kind of like push them into the nooks and crannies, get them exactly where I want them to be. And this is actually quite a fun process because it's already starting to take shape and look like what I had in my head when I first imagined what I'm going to do with this Beercan. And as you can see, because of the green of the moss, it was a good decision to make the thing a little bit more blue than green. Of course, I need to make sure that all of those little moss bits don't fall off, so I need to seal them in. So all I did was to add water to the PVA glue that I've been using before. And diluted like this, I'm actually using it to thoroughly soak all of those little fibers of artificial moss. It's actually really wet at this point and it takes a long time to dry, but because they are all saturated, that glue has a chance to really get absorbed and attached into all of the moss bits. As you can see, many hours later or even overnight, I don't remember, it ends up being permanent and it doesn't flake. It's like safe to use around the house. At this point I'm really happy with it, but there's a problem. That edge inside was a little bit too messy for my taste. So I grabbed another piece of that ribbon that I originally used. I painted it dark brown and I added a little bit of that copper color. And I'm going to glue it in the inside. I'm not gonna use hot glue this time because it's blobby and it's really hard to work with the nozzle inside of a cylinder. Instead, I'm going to be using some solvent glue. This doesn't catch as fast as hot glue does, but I'm being a little bit patient and like holding it with my fingers, giving it a chance to grab onto the metal. And the idea is that this will actually be a functional vase because it is a beer can, it is waterproof inside, and the outside should be like good enough to be splash proof. So I will be using this around my house to actually keep flowers in. For photo shoot purposes, though, I didn't have any flowers. It's the middle of the winter here, so I just used some artificial flowers to show you what it will look like. My friend called this aesthetic picnic in the robot graveyard, and I just love how that captures the essence of what I was going for. Made me really happy. I hope you enjoyed this video. Do let me know what you think about it in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you like this sort of projects, please consider subscribing to my channel. I publish new videos every week. Thank you for watching. I hope you're having a nice day. Bye.